Hello, everybody. Welcome back to English Champion. A special episode this time. I'm talking with a cognitive and developmental psychologist, a college professor for almost 40 years, and he's my dad. So you're going to get double Dr. Spivey's today. I wanted to ask him about some of the trends I've seen in teaching lately, some of the myths, some of the kind of misunderstandings, how teachers get kind of enamored with shiny new things when, in fact, the best and most useful teaching methods have actually been around for a very long time. Teachers are just not aware of them. And so I wanted to kind of get an expert's perspective, especially from the historical standpoint, about how long these theories have been around. And as I've mentioned before, I kind of I came into these things very naturally. I knew how to be a pretty good teacher right from the start. And I think the big reason for that was because I grew up in a household with someone who does this for a living. He understands how the brain works. And so when a guy who's a cognitive psychologist is your dad, who's teaching you how to play sports or how to do anything else or work on your reading and writing assignments, you kind of pick up on all those things, and they became who I became as a teacher. And so I know not everyone is as fortunate as that as I was, and so I wanted to just share a little bit of my dad's thoughts on some of these things, because I think, as I've said recently, we can all be way better teachers, and we just have to be aware of the best methodology. And unfortunately, in recent decades, I think too many teachers have gotten off track and have gotten kind of sidetracked by things that just don't really work, and that they're very jargony and very trendy. And understanding the basics of how the brain works and how we can use that in the classroom is really, really important. So I've decided to bug my dad here, and he actually was a professor for 38 years and is cleaning out his office as I speak to him. And so it's kind of like in The Godfather, where he keeps trying to escape the mafia. He's like, they keep pulling me back in. I keep bugging him about this stuff, even though he's trying to retire. So I was very grateful that he took time to talk to me and share some of these thoughts that he and I have been talking about every week for 40 years, but maybe other people haven't heard them. So this is a relatively short conversation with my dad. Enjoy. So let's get a definition straight for teachers or parents out there, that when we say learning, when we're talking about teaching, that can get tied up into a lot of different things where we're talking about kids' age levels or assessment. It can get a little complicated on what kind of instruction we're really aiming at. But when you guys in the sciences say learning, for kids or for anybody else, what exactly do you guys use as a definition for real learning?
General definition typically deals with a relatively permanent change in behavior due to experience. When we tie it more into the cognitive psychology aspect of things, now we're looking at an accumulation of knowledge, skills, attitudes, maybe again due to experience. So
Okay.
experience is key to all of this. You've got to have some kind of experience. Otherwise, we're not really talking about learning.
And is this, how do you guys differentiate between what might be considered short-term learning versus long-term learning?
Yeah, now from a cognitive psychology perspective, now we're looking at memory. So memory is going to have to be tied to our ability to access that information, knowledge, or those skills, and then implement them and engage in some kind of behavior. So now we've added memory into the equation as well. So have I gotten this stored in memory so that whatever the attitude was, the skill set was, the knowledge base was, whatever, I can now use that, I can access it to engage in this behavior. And hopefully, because of that experience, as I put it into memory, that behavior didn't exist before, now it can because of that experience. And that experience obviously involves putting it into memory. And sometimes, whether it's a short-term memory or a long-term memory.
So one of the things that I have noticed a lot lately is the regarding learning. It's just basic comprehension. It's moving from being exposed to something in reading or in listening form, new information, maybe perhaps a new skill, and truly understanding it and then getting that to work into long-term memory. And the ideas I've been seeing from people, I immediately was like, well, this is really old stuff. How are people just now hearing about this? So let's talk about, from a comprehension standpoint, how old these ideas really are, because I remember you talking about this forever ago, and yet there are many teachers who think this is all brand new. So just a really quick kind of background history on kind of some of the components of comprehension, and how long these ideas have been around, where the research started, and all of that.
Well, as far as cognitive issues are concerned, research was going on centuries ago. Philosophers were talking about memory and understanding things. What changed over time was we added more scientific approach to dealing with this memory or this understanding and things like that, trying to measure it, trying to scientifically explore it, things like that. So it's probably really the early 60s, maybe right after World War II, as we're starting to look at the inventions of computers, artificial intelligence, as we're starting to look at how do we take this idea of memory or some kind of knowledge and things like that, create something where we could now test this out, create something that we could put forth some kind of an activity that we could monitor, we could test it, etc. So probably Ulrich Nieser in the 60s comes out with a textbook identifying cognitive psychology and what that entails. It's relatively limited. Up to this point, behaviorism had pretty much governed much of what psychology was doing. But behaviorism obviously is inadequate in explaining human behavior when we're just looking at some kind of basic behavior like pressing a lever that a rat can do. Now we're looking at pretty complex behaviors that humans can do. So we had to go back to kind of, again, studying the mind more, understanding kind of how the mind works, how the mind functions, which again, artificial intelligence was beginning to look pretty seriously at that. Now we brought it back to human behavior. Okay? So we start looking at memory, understanding. Bloom, again, back in the 60s, begins to look at things like his taxonomy of what the mind is doing. So it isn't so much as we're engaging in some kind of activity. Well, what is that activity? Okay, just basic remembering, comprehending, okay? Applying what it is that we're putting into memory, analyzing, if it's pretty complex, how do we break it down into its parts, synthesizing it. So once it's been broken down, can I create back up a wholeness to this thing? And then evaluating it. So now we're expanding just, okay, here's what's up there. What is going on with this memory or this knowledge that we've accumulated? So this is back in the 60s when we started experimenting with this more. How is the mind working? Not just did it get in there and now it's being implemented in some kind of behavior, but how do we study this now? And so, like I say, Bloom's taxonomy emerges here in the 60s.
Just really quickly before we also want to get further into the comprehension stuff, I've been reading some things lately about some controversies with Bloom's taxonomy and
Yeah,
how it's, it's not really this pyramid. It's not really a hierarchy. It's a lot more flat, and you can actually do some of the what might have been considered advanced uh, skills or whatever you want to call them, even earlier than maybe some of the other ones. It depends on how it's being used. So
yeah.
where's which I would tend to agree with. I don't think things necessarily have to move upwards in that order. I think they can bounce around a little bit. I do think what it probably is, and you can clarify for me, is that there are certain mental tasks that are more challenging, that require more background, more shifts in perspective or whatever it takes, more memory. So clarify for us what has been some of the controversy about Bloom and what's the right way to think of that.
Well, again, Bloom is looking at more of a critical thinking or how is the mind using this information. And obviously, yeah, there's some skills like comprehension is certainly more complex than just remembering something. Okay, I can remember 2 + 2 = 4, and that's fine with whatever task you're wanting to engage that. But understanding what does that even mean and how can I use that is probably a more advanced type of thinking. Same thing with application. It isn't so much do I just understand it, but I can see how this thing works in the real world, or can I come up with an example of how this would work in the real world? So I have to understand that in order to then maybe to apply it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think on some level, there's definitely more intricate or more complex kinds of skills that we're using when we're talking about learning or when we're talking about just basic information that we've acquired. So it's more what are we doing with it? Same thing with analysis. Analysis is taking something pretty complex and breaking it down into its parts. We'll certainly have to understand on some level what that is, but maybe I have to do that in order to understand after I've broken it down into its more simple parts. Okay. Or maybe I've gotten something that is fairly simple or broken up into pieces. And can I synthesize that now into something else? Could I create something? That's where creativity comes in. Can I synthesize this in new and different ways? Is that different than just understanding what those parts were? Because I've created something from that. So my philosophy has been, yeah, I think definitely as we look at those different skill sets or how we're using that information, there are some of those skills that are way more complex than others.
Right.
And I think analysis is a really good example of that. Can I understand this pretty complex object or concept? Not yet, not until I break it down. Well, is that more advanced? Yeah. Do I even know how to break it down? And how far do I break it down into a form where I can understand it? So
Right.
does that make sense?
Yeah. So, which is kind of what I've always thought that Bloom's, it's not necessarily the sequential order where you have to
Yeah,
go from step to step. It
right.
just highlights that there are certain skills that are more complex.
Exactly.
Sometimes you can actually do those, which helps you understand the what would have been considered the simpler or lower
Yeah.
level part of it. But they're all valuable, and
Yeah.
there are differences between some of those skills.
And again, I think it comes into this idea, which is relatively new, but not really, this idea of critical thinking. Okay. So I'm doing something with whatever it is I have just accumulated, or I'm just taking into memory now and trying to, you know, reflect on it. I'm trying to apply it into my life, maybe reference it to myself, whatever, so that then I can do a better job of using this information that just came in. Yeah.
So
So
along the lines of
critical
the
thinking is,
critical thinking, yeah, along the
yeah,
lines of the critical thinking, the especially when it comes to reading, because there's been so much discussion about reading and how students aren't reading, and if they are, they're not really remembering things, they're not learning things, they're not comprehending, and so those basic skills of reading, and as you've done research too on listening, where summarizing, predicting, um, clarifying, questioning, I would add connecting in there in addition um, to the clarifying. Um, but these are not new ideas. Again, I keep hearing people talking about how, oh, here's this new, cognitive science approach to teaching reading. And I'm like, wait a minute, this has been around forever. So again, just real quick background on some of this research.
reciprocal teaching
Right. Yeah.
is more where that. And again, this is built on just some early research on metacognitive kind of things, thinking about our thinking. And one of the metacognitive skills that we are looking at is not just comprehending, but am I monitoring my comprehension? Do I know that I understand something? Do I know how to critically think about something? And do I know when I don't? Do I understand, okay, wait a minute, I didn't understand this, or I didn't understand it well enough to be able to use this work. So we're getting into some of Anne Brown's research fairly early on in the 80s, early 80s. And then she worked together with Anna Marie Palingsar and constructed this idea of reciprocal teaching, which is exactly some of those skills you just talked about, the clarifying, summarizing, questioning, predicting. So in this case, it started all in reading. Okay? And could we help children, especially younger children, just learning how to read, do a better job of not just comprehending what they have just read, but also monitor their comprehension? Again, moving into that metacognitive area. Did I really understand? Because if I can't summarize something really well, there comes a red flag. Well, I didn't understand it. Or if I can't clarify it to someone, I can't explain it to someone, suggests I didn't understand it. Or if I can't predict what's going to come next, so I just read a paragraph, now here comes another paragraph next. Can I even predict what I think might come in that next paragraph? And if I can't do that, then I certainly didn't understand this current paragraph. And can I construct a decent question that maybe a teacher would ask regarding what I just read? And can I answer the question that I just constructed? So all of those were skills that we're looking at teaching a young reader to not only make sure that they've understood what it was they just read, but also did they recognize that I didn't understand this well enough? And now I'm going to have to do something about that. There's the next step in this. If I didn't understand it, what do I do? Well, I could ask the question to a teacher. Okay, well, I didn't understand it. Can you explain that better? Okay, or maybe I could ask one of my classmates or something who might be sitting next to me. Okay, but too many times, especially with young readers, they didn't even recognize they didn't know it. So now it comes in with the teacher working with the student. And as they just summarize this, the teacher said, well, sweetie, that you didn't summarize it really well. Let's try it again. What did you miss? And how I can help you understand a little bit more by bringing in, here's the things that were actually in the passage that you missed or you didn't understand it. But let's read it again, maybe, and see, can we do a better job of summarizing it? Or maybe now as the teacher, I'm going to ask you a question about it. Can you explain this part to me? There's the clarification. So it's very much an interactive process, the teacher working with the student. And now if the student still can't, do a decent job of explaining or clarifying, now the teacher steps in. Well, okay, here's really what was being said here. Here's how we can explain it as we put it into our board. So we're going beyond just summarizing it. I'm not just repeating the content. Now I'm going further and helping someone else understand it better. Maybe I'm giving examples or something like that. Okay. Same thing with predicting. Okay. If they can't predict, now it raises that red flag. And now the teacher can help them. Well, okay, here's what we just read. Now, based on the information here, the content that was here, let's project ahead of what might come next. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And you actually were in contact with some of these researchers during your own dissertation process
Yeah.
40 some odd years ago. That's how long ago this has been, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Palanchar and Brown's article on reciprocal teaching reading skills, first came out in 1986. And that's when I was in grad school. That's when I was beginning to build on a dissertation topic. And I started reading some of their stuff, some stuff on metacognition too. And it just piqued my interest very much. So I actually contacted them. I was a little bit nervous about that because, here's someone who's published and they've been teaching for quite a while in the Midwest area. And I was kind of surprised that, one, they even took my call, and two, they're actually excited to talk about the research. And it kind of makes sense now as one who's been in the field and have done some research, things like that. This is important to you. This is my baby. This is what I've been working on, and somebody else is interested in it. And so, yeah, so we probably talked for maybe, I don't know, half an hour. And just, yeah, what she did was confirmed what I was thinking, okay, and what I thought was going to be the direction I wanted to take the research. And I was looking at learning disabilities. So there's the kind of taking what they were doing and finding a new way to apply this. So a child who has a learning disability, one of the areas that's probably failing for them is this idea of comprehension. They're not understanding what they have just read. Could I now look at that particular population? And they hadn't done that yet. Again, they were looking at relatively young kids and the problems that they were having just as new readers. Now, could I look at a population that we have identified as someone who struggles in this area? And could we improve their comprehension and their monitoring if we employ this kind of approach, this kind of intervention for them? Now,
And
that didn't work out that way for my dissertation. Had to take a different direction, not because of what Palanchar and Brown were doing or anything like that, but just because, at least in the area where I was working and trying to start my dissertation, they weren't going to let me do that. So I had to find a different population, which then became college students who identified as poor readers, or now as I'm expanding it to listening, based on SAT and ACT scores. So they weren't identified with learning disabilities or anything like that, but they were identified with low verbal ability versus normal or high verbal ability. And so I had to change some of what I was approaching, but still stayed within Palanchar and Brown's intervention. Could I use the reciprocal teaching to improve the listening comprehension and comprehension monitoring skills in these college students? So I've moved away from children to college students and went away from reading to listening. So.
And regardless of the age level, the goal here with these methods is really teacher directed, or at least tutor directed, someone who's way more knowledgeable. It's not having the kids work on things by themselves, questioning each other as a way of trying to improve comprehension or learning. It's really from the teacher, because I hear the techniques and the buzzwords of turn and talk and think, pair, share, and it's about getting kids talking to each other, and they think, well, that's going to improve comprehension because they're talking. And the real research is actually about either in a small group form or in, a good teacher can do it in a large classroom, these types of questioning techniques that improve comprehension to get like you said, the students' metacognition improving, with the ultimate goal, right, of being able to do this on their own forever in the future, that this becomes the way they think about reading, that every time I read now, I'm internally summarizing that paragraph. I'm making a prediction about what the next chapter is going to be about. I can ask myself questions and be able to, the goal is independence and automaticity. And it seems like a lot of teachers are making the activity the goal. It's like, no, it's the metacognition and the independence of it. You're training your own brain to see when you get stuff and when you don't get stuff. And that has to be directed by a teacher. Am I right?
Yeah. Well, again, it ties a lot into Vygotsky's work. So some of Palanchar and Brown's work ties into this more advanced learner helping this less advanced learner. Well, who's the most advanced learner in a classroom? It would be the teacher. So you start there. But if I have others that I've identified that are already understanding and using these other skills, understanding, clarifying, etc., could I put them into a group and have that small group with a more advanced learner helping those less advanced learners? Yeah, it's still an intervention. And it's a cooperative learning, or it's a guided participation. The key in this situation is it's guided. Someone who's more advanced is guiding this process, helping these less advanced learners get up to speed. What we're looking for is something called, Vygotsky describes as intersubjectivity. which is taking this difference and bringing them up to where I'm at now as the advanced learner. Okay. Then you're right. Then they could do it themselves. They don't need me to guide them anymore. They don't need me to be the one who's leading them through all this. No, they can do it themselves now. But we started here. Now we've moved up to here. Then we can start another task, maybe a harder text that we would read together. Okay. And I could help you move further and further. This is also describing the zone of proximal development, which is some of Vygotsky's work too. What can you do by yourself? Okay. Versus what can you do with help? And what can't you do at all? So some of that comes into play here, both from the teacher's perspective or from to put you into group work. What do you need help with? And how much then does this advanced learner help guide you to this point of intersubjectivity where now we're on the same plane? We understand it the same way. Okay, so Vygotsky comes into play here as well. His is a cooperative learning approach. His is we learn through interacting with other people. I look at this a little bit from my perspective too, almost like an apprenticeship. We're kind of working together on this, even if it's in a relatively small group or maybe in a large group. But it's harder when they're looking at an entire classroom to go through this. It's more easy to do it when small groups are one-on-one. But now, I'm guiding you along. I'm showing you what you need to do. I'm giving you feedback through all of this until finally you can do it yourself. I don't have to guide you. So,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of teachers who say, well, and to work on the comprehension and to kind of enhance the socialization, it's well, turn to your partner and explain what, summarize that paragraph. Well, there's not a lot of monitoring of how effective that is. The other person can't judge if that summary was even accurate or not. So leaving the kids to kind of, even if you've prompted them and you've given them kind of a starter sentence or something to get them on the right track, it's not clear that there's always a lot of learning necessarily, unless you've got someone there to provide feedback and monitoring of that guided practice, which is what a teacher or at least some advanced kind of tutor would be able to provide. And at the college level, I was lucky to have, maybe you've had TAs as well, but in my kind of remedial reading and writing classes, that's what I had my TAs doing a lot, is like work with these 4 kids.
yep.
And you've had me, what we do, the kinds of questions we're trying to get here. You work on those with those remedial kids, and then maybe we would switch out, but it was always with someone who's way smarter, not just peer to peer, tutor or teacher leading it.
Yeah. So I've always said too, if I want to put you into groups, I have to be very purposeful in what is the makeup of this group.
Yes.
And if I want some of this guided participation, I need to make sure that if I'm going to have you in a group and you're working a little bit more by yourselves over there, who's leading this thing out?
Right.
Do they understand their role in this little group that we put you into? And if there's no leader, if there's no person who's guiding them in these skills, like I said, whether it's a summarization, whether it's the clarification, whatever, if there's no one guiding that and monitoring how these kids are doing, there's no learning that's going to take place. There's no improvement in their comprehension or their monitoring either, because the person who's guiding that, if they don't understand or see that the person doesn't clarify it or doesn't summarize it well, then certainly the student isn't going to get it either. So it becomes very important as to how do I create these groups? How do I compose these groups in such a way that Vygotsky's work actually plays out? If I just throw them into groups and let them do their thing, I can't guarantee anything of value is going to come up out of that.
Right.
Yeah. Which always concerned me too. And let's just put them into groups. And that seemed to be for a while what we were doing in a lot of classes. We'll just put them into groups until now we're starting to find out that doesn't work. Parent share doesn't work. Just putting them into groups doesn't work. And also when we put them into groups, a lot of times we don't come back as the larger group and start to look at, well, what did you guys discover? And then we maybe discover that you don't know anything of what you're talking about. Okay. And you thought you were fairly successful. No, you weren't. So now it becomes me as the teacher to have to guide this thing again. And too many times we don't come back to the larger group. We don't come back to the teacher who should be able to now make sure that we've been guiding this thing along as it should have been. We just assumed learning must be taking place because we would put them into groups.
Yeah, the activity becomes the goal. Like, well, we got to get them to do something. And then the principal walks in and observes your class and goes, oh, well, look, this class is doing great. Look how active the kids are. There's active learning and the kids are excited. It's like, yeah, but they're not learning necessarily. So cognitive load theory, another buzzword in recent years, not a new idea once again, right?
No. Again, as we're starting to look at cognition, getting information into the mind, into memory, it all comes down to how much are you attending to it? What you attend to is what gets into memory, whether it's short-term and ultimately then gets moved on into long-term memory. So, you know, and the question always was, well, how much can you attend to? And how much of your resources, your attention resources, do you need to put into getting this into memory? And certainly there's developmental issues to this. Young children don't attend as well as older children, and older children don't attend as well typically as adolescents, and even adolescents typically don't attend as well, maybe as those in adulthood, at least until maybe we get to late adulthood. Not as good attention in late adulthood, maybe. So yeah, how do we get it in? Because that the first step in getting it into memory is this attention, moving it, transferring it from just the outside space here into memory. And harder things, difficult tasks require more attention, more focus, more direct focus, as well as maybe even more sustained focus over time to be able to do this. So we begin to find, yeah, there's certain tasks that are pretty high load tasks. It takes pretty much all of your attention just to get it into memory. And because of that focused attention, maybe you're able, at least as an older child, as an adolescent, to ignore a lot of the distractions that are out there. Okay. Younger children don't do that as well. So even on a high load task, they're easily distracted. And so are they going to get that information into memory? Not as well. Okay. So they can do something with it, maybe. Okay. Older children, yeah, better. Not perfect at that focused attention, okay, on this more difficult task. As they work with that task and that task gets easier, maybe through practice or more instruction, then I don't maybe have to allocate as much resources to this information that's coming. Now I can allocate it to other things. So now we're dealing with things like multiple attention or multitasking, divided attention, things like that. So yeah, easy task, I can divide attention pretty easily. Okay. I can do multiple things. I can do 2 or 3 things all at once. Not so much when it's brand new or when it's really difficult. Again, a good example is when we're driving. When you first learn how to drive, you have to get rid of all the distractions, don't you? Okay. Okay. I can't have the music on. Nobody can talk to me. I'm like this, and I'm focused on the road and focused on the activity of me driving. But as I've gotten better through instruction and through practice, just more experience with driving, I don't have to allocate all of those resources to the driving. Now I can talk to other people. I can listen to some music. Now, are we perfect under multitasking? No. Look at people who've been driving and texting, okay, and the horrible things that happen with that. So we think we're pretty good at this multitasking because one of these tasks is pretty automatic, or at least it's pretty easy now. It doesn't mean, I don't have to pay attention to it anymore, or I'm automatically going to get it. Not necessarily. So
Well, a lot of it's rooted, in practice. We get better with practice, but it's also just from an instructional standpoint. Um, Again, isn't this common sense that like if you can tell as the adult, the teacher or a parent, that hey, this thing I'm going to teach my kid is actually a little bit complex. I can't just throw the whole thing at him all at once. I need to break it up into small pieces. We need to go very sequentially through this. And yet again, that's something that I keep hearing. Like teachers are just now discovering this, and I'm like, how is this? I know I'm biased because I grew up in a household with you where you've been doing this with me for 50 years, but like, how does everyone not understand this? Why don't teachers know that you have to go sequentially and very slowly through these, especially tasks that are high cognitive load? You can't just throw a brand new concept at them. Why? How do people not know this? Isn't this common sense?
yeah, it should be. But again, I think we come at it from our own perspective. I understand it really well. You ought to too. And sometimes I find this I think applies in sports too. There's a lot of sports issues. I think a lot of times some of our best players in sports don't make the best coaches at all.
Sure.
They just, this is easy, just do it. Well, I don't understand it. Well, just do it, try harder or something. And that wasn't work. Same thing with some academic kind of things. Some of my strongest like mathematicians that are just brilliant weren't the best teachers. And it's like they're wanting to go from A to L, and I can't go from A to L on this, whether we're solving some kind of theorem or we're trying to compute some kind of equation or whatever. It's like they're suddenly over at L, and I didn't see anything in between there. But because they saw it, they understood it, you should too. So sometimes I think teachers don't always understand their students as well as they should. They assume some things about their students that you should have this by now. We're assuming, I think, too much as teachers. And part of it is, I think we are not, this is going to sound a little harsh, we're not as fully invested in our students as I think we probably should be. Understanding more of where they're at, what they're able to do, getting to know them better so that we can meet them kind of at their level. That's hard when you've got 30 in the classroom. I mean, how do you deal with all 30 of them? Um, that makes it difficult. And so even if I do care about my students, even though I want to get them to where I think they need to be, I don't know enough about them in order to start. So we get back to Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. We assume that they are within the zone, that they can do this with help, and they can't, at least not yet. Okay. So I need to work out. So you're exactly right. I need to step back. I need to break this thing down into something less complex, something that maybe they can't do yet by themselves, but they can with me helping them. And so again, it's all knowing where in the zone are these students and how much help do they need. And I think that's a failure sometimes on our part as teachers. Don't know exactly what they need. So my instruction's way up here and they're down here somewhere and it's just, flying right on by and we're not getting it. So
Well, to
that's
that
on
point
us.
about teachers and how we could improve or how we could train them better, what do you think has happened in the last 30 years, especially? I'm sure there was bad teachers before that, obviously, but where it seems like, yeah, we don't know these basic teaching practices. We don't know the cognitive science. They're just now discovering it and they think it's brand new. What has happened in the meantime? Because um, it seems to be so prevalent and the data just shows it that our kids are just not performing. So something must have been going on that we haven't been implementing these proper techniques. So what do you think that is?
As you just kind of mentioned, I think some of that is in higher education. We're not doing as good a job there as we need to. A lot of times you might, if you are lucky, might take one educational psychology class or one cognitive psychology class, maybe. So you don't fully understand how the mind works. You don't fully understand the information processing of the mind, how we take information in, what do we do to make sense of it, how do we critically think about things. So we're not getting that instruction ourselves. So how are we supposed to use that then as we're trying to implement some things in the classroom? If we're trying to teach them something, we don't necessarily know exactly how the mind works all that well ourselves, maybe. Um, I might know the content fairly well. So if I'm a math teacher, okay, I know how to do the computations. I know how to take this particular equation and maybe, take it and do something with it. I don't know why, and I don't know how you as the student are able to take that in and how you're going to do something with it. We're assuming, I think you're going to do it the same way that I do at whatever level you're at. Well, they can't. So I think that's part of it. I think we don't teach our teachers about how the mind works and why the mind doesn't work as well as it could. So maybe even bring some developmental things into it. Why is this, 6-year-old different cognitively than this 12-year-old or 15-year-old, whatever? So if I might have taken one developmental class, is that enough? A lot of times we're focused on the content, and I understand that. We've got to teach the math content or the history content or the English content. I'm not always getting the experience in how are they learning this content? What do I need to do to help them get it into memory? What techniques can I use to help them understand it better? Again, whether it's Vygotsky, whether it is some other kind of teaching tool to help them understand the mind better. I don't think we do as good enough job of that. And the teachers
Yeah,
fall in that area. They don't know it. And again, a lot of times our go-to explanation for that, it's on the kids. They're just not trying hard enough, or they don't care enough, or whatever, it's on them instead of, well, we need to be looking at ourselves as teachers. And how can I do a better job of instructing them, understanding them, building strategies that would be effective in teaching those students? I think a lot of our teachers have that knowledge base themselves. They don't know what to do. And it's because the kid just didn't try hard enough. On some level, again, there's this idea of fixed or a variable mindset, a growth mindset. Well, you just need to try harder. Okay, but on some level, that might be an important thing we need to be able to look at. But just because I'm trying harder and I'm not doing it the right way, I'm still not going to learn. Again,
yeah.
uh, back to sports. And again, anything that you're familiar with there, your practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice does. So even though you've been practicing this and trying really hard, if you're not doing it the right way, you're not going to show the skill that you need. So a lot of times that's all we go to. Well, you just need to try that. You need to work more. Well, if they don't have the skills to implement during that work, during that practice, they're not going to see much improvement. Again, that gets back into Vygotsky. Who's the one who's guiding this? Who is the expert learner in this situation? And should be the teacher who's guiding appropriately, bringing that intersubjectivity about, and we're not, maybe, not as well as we could.
It seems like a lot of people in education get kind of enamored with trends and the shiny thing, and here's the new hack, here's the new method that's going to make all this easier. And it seems like those are some things that have really derailed us and gotten us off onto things that, yeah, that actually doesn't work. You're doing this out of some convenience, or you think it's working in one way, but it's actually not working in the way you're intending. And we're not getting back to the basics of these very old understandings of how the brain actually works and the processes, uh, well, again, kids or anyone else go through to really learn. And is it because is it because teachers are under so much strain and pressure that like we have to perform better, and so they're out constantly looking to chasing the next new thing when it's like, no, let's just do the old thing way better. Like what do you think's happening with that?
I think that's just part of our I don't want to be too generalized here, but some of our basic nature, we want to find something that is easier, something that is new. Um, I look at maybe like being on a diet or losing weight. We keep looking for the next best thing, whether it's Ozempic or what. And just give me a pill so I can lose the weight. So this new thing comes out. I'm pretty enamored with it. Exactly. I think, oh my gosh, this will do it. So I don't have to know about Ozempic. I don't have to know about how the whole thing works, how metabolism works, or how my gut works, or whatever. I just know if I take this will be okay. Um, and too many times it hasn't worked, these new fads for dieting or whatever. Um, so I think the same thing, we get this new intervention that sounds really good, and I just kind of follow what they did. And does it work all the time? No. Or in many cases, it's just a rehashing of what has been done before, but it sounds cool, it sounds new, it sounds different. But that's what I'm looking for. I don't want to say we're lazy, but I tend to kind of like that shortcut. I want somebody else to tell me this is what you need to do, because I don't know. I get back to what I was talking about before. I don't know enough about the student. I don't know enough about how the mind works, maybe. But you need to tell me, what do I need to do here? Pair and share. That sounds good. Let's do that. Instead of understanding, okay, that's fine if you just want them to talk, if you want to get them to socialize a bit. But why doesn't it work? Or what do we need to do that would be more successful? So again, I think it gets back to, we've not been training teachers well enough on how the mind works, how the process of memory and forgetting or understanding any of those things as well as probably we could. So they not only understand, okay, this is what you do, but here's why, and here's the research behind it. Maybe you just tell me what to do with these kids, because I got 30 of them, and I got this pressure, and I need to make sure that they're passing their placement tests, or they're passing whatever kinds of assessments that we've got, because that's what seems to be what is more important. So instead of me understanding fully the whole process, fully how the student works and how the mind works, just tell me what to do. That's not just in teaching. I think, this is something that we're somewhat susceptible to, maybe, in much of what we do. Just tell me what to do. In business, same thing. In finance, maybe just tell me which stock. Instead of understanding how the stock is working, how the business is working, just tell me what stock.
Right.
I might be simplifying that too much, but I think that's just some of who we are.
Sure.
And,
Last question, expanding away from just teaching, but also parenting. So if teachers are trying to get better in the classroom, or parents are trying to either supplement their kids' education or even take it over themselves, because we're seeing that movement a lot in recent years. What's the number one thing that teachers should be doing, but even parents should be doing to get their kids learning better? What would be the most foundational thing to get kids on the right track, both from parents as well as from teachers?
boy, I think there's some parents that do this really well and some parents that struggle a bit, but I think part of it is more, what is my role as the parent, and expand that. I think too many times in some areas, well, this whole learning thing, that's the teacher's job. Okay. And so in many cases, the parent doesn't know much of what goes on in the classroom. The parent doesn't know much of how the teachers are teaching because they've abdicated the responsibility to them. I think sometimes in our spiritual kind of thing, well, that's the Sunday school teacher's job, or that is the pastor's job. So that's on them, and I don't have to delve into it. Instead of spending more time with my child, that my job as a parent is to be there for the child in all facets of their lives, including learning. So I need to understand my kid. I need to understand some of how they're learning and how they're doing things. So I can, in many cases, maybe supplement what's going on in the classroom, or maybe even come up with something different that actually will work for my child. Um, and same thing, I think, in all facets of their life, to understand my child better, to invest my time and effort in my child. And that includes every aspect of the child's life, including the life. So maybe I do need to kind of invest a little more time in me understanding how my kid, thinks, and how my child processes through information, and pay attention and be there with their homework and be there with them as they're going through these learning processes. So I understand that a little bit better. And I can come alongside. Again, it's a stewardship, it's a discipling, all of those things that ties us together as followers of Christ. How do we do that? Well, how did Christ teach his disciples? Well, he came alongside of it. How do we do that with our kids? We're alongside of it. Just like I think the teachers need to do a little better job at coming alongside of it. So I think that's part of it. I think we need to understand our kids a little better. We need to understand this whole process and invest the time a little more. I think there's some parents that do that really well. I think looking at myself, I didn't do as well as I could have. I know that. And I lament that a bit now as a especially one in the field that I've chosen. I should have done a better job for my kids. But I think that's part of it. I think it's just, who is the most important part of our lives? Our family. And who is the one that should take on that responsibility? That would be us. So.
Well said. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Sure.
So there you have it. My dad being very humble and modest at the end there. He did a great job raising us, and I'm very appreciative for the fact that he taught me how to become a good teacher. And I know not everybody has that opportunity. And so I hope there was something informative there for everybody, whether you're a teacher or a parent, because everyone can do a better job. We've got to get our kids smarter. And getting back to the basics is how you do that. These ideas have been around a very long time. Thank you for watching. See you next time.